Teachers of Reddit, what clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? Student teaching for high school seniors and juniors. I had this guy that was a shady 80, no specific problems, just very low intelligence. But this guy worked his ass off. Never a late assignment. Did all extra credit that was offered. Usually extra credit is done by those who don't need it and ignored by those who do need it. Made flashcards for like every test and quiz even though I never said to. Model student, just had low test scores. If it was an assignment that could be done with time and effort, he did it. Unfortunately tests aren't like that, and that's where he had the most problems. Back to school night comes along and I meet his dad, an NCO in the Marines. Courteous, well-spoken, and completely knowledgeable about all of his son's upcoming assignments and grades. Totally made sense. Kid is getting through with hard work and dedication and pulling off a B average. Amazing what support from parents can do. In most cases, a kid like this would probably be failing most of his classes. This is less dramatic than the others, but still one of those aha moments. Had an 8th grade student. Great kid, 100% responsible, academically talented, and would always speak in short clipped sentences, and look like he was a frightened deer about to bolt. Had a conference with him and his parents together in which the kid was supposed to be leading the conference, reflecting on his growth and identifying his challenges. Every time the kid opened his mouth to say something, he'd get halfway through the sentence and mom would finish it for him. Poor kid was always trying to get ideas out quickly so he wouldn't be interrupted. I had a 2nd grade student who was constantly getting into pretty serious physical altercations with others, stabbing kids with pencils, slapping girls across the face, etc. The first time I met his mom was when she came up to the school threatening to choke me because I said her son couldn't come on a field trip to the pumpkin patch because he was too violent. Not a teacher, but I do volunteer work for a program designed to help students who are habitually truant. Had one middle schooler who was super bright, genuinely seemed to love school, got great grades, but was absent about half the time. He was very evasive about why he wasn't coming to class, and I honestly didn't put him high on my list because he was doing fine even with the missed days. When I was finally able to get a social worker to go by his house, it turned out his single mother was having seizures and didn't have any healthcare, so she couldn't get treatment for them. And the kid was staying home to take care of both her and his younger brother. I felt just terrible for the kid having to be so adult while still in middle school. I was a teacher in a deaf school for many years. Kids lived on campus as well. I would take the kids home for visits on weekends. One kid was a major behavior problem and always screamed and yelled and broke things and was just generally all around disruptive. We got along better than most staff did, so I volunteered to take him home one weekend. He missed his van. When I got to his house, none of his family members even looked at him. He was a teenager by this point. Fucking family never took the time to learn sign language. Yeah, all his problems made a lot of sense to me at that point. Not a teacher, but a youth worker. Sibling group, all speak as if they're deaf, accent, incorrect emphasis, excluded sounds, and exhibit rash, impulsive behavior. High instances of school refusal. But polite, ambitious, aspirational, popular, and well-dressed. Turns out mom had an intellectual disability and was a drug addict, so all 3 kids had IDs and possibly FOST. But grandma was a drug dealer, so they always had loads of money for clothes and food, and drugs. Kids had just learnt to speak like that based on their mom's speech, which was affected by her constant drug use. When I was student teaching, 2nd grade, there was a little boy in the class who was just a genuinely friendly and sweet kid. He struggled a little academically when it came to learning to read, and his handwriting had some problems. But he was the hardest worker and never got frustrated or thought that we was stupid, like many other students with those difficulties do. He was well liked by everyone and didn't have a mean bone in his body. And he was extremely well adjusted, despite the fact that his parents were divorced. I ended up meeting both parents separately during field trips. Both parents are extremely involved in his life and put him ahead of any of their problems they have with each other. They genuinely want what's best for him, and it shows. The dad takes him out to the sports bar for boys' night where they share root beer, which I thought was really cool. Both parents genuinely are awesome people with great attitudes, and it definitely shows in their kid. When I was student teaching, I had a student who seemed to have textbook fetal alcohol syndrome. Then one day I saw her with her mother at Target, and I recognized her mother as one of the longtime regulars, chronic alcoholics at a bar I worked at in college. The whole thing made sense, and it was very sad. College freshman was constantly late, didn't turn work in on time or at all, etc. She had an excuse for every single thing. I wasn't even asking. She just volunteered excuses. After getting a D in my class, which was frankly a bit generous as her actual grade was a high F, her mother called me. I wasn't allowed to discuss a student's performance with anyone, including their parents, and I told her as much. Her mother then, unprompted, gave me a long string of excuses for her daughter and, oddly, herself. I kind of thought, oh, that makes sense now. I don't know if this counts, but I used to help tutor ESL to Spanish-speaking immigrants. There was one woman who was super focused and dedicated, and was making real improvements lesson to lesson. But she would miss massive amounts of time because she said she had to work, take care of her kid, and it really hurt her studies. She was stressed and frustrated all of the time even though she said she loved her job and was doing all right for herself. Then one day she brought her mother in because she hadn't been to tutoring in a month and needed to come, I guess. That woman was a terror. She wasn't even that old, probably in her late 50s. She yelled at her granddaughter, who also came along, and would smack her randomly, complaining that she was so ill-behaved. It clicked that the woman was missing so much time because she had to babysit her mother just as much as her daughter. I felt so bad for her that she had such a burden, and yet so much respect that she'd go through so much to care for her mother. Obviously an extreme example here, but I had a student, an 8th grader, who was quiet to the point of absolute silence, but who did extraordinarily well with the written word. A few times, he showed up with bruises, which I naturally reported, but he was adamant that they were from other students. Surprisingly, his parents came in for PTC and seemed relatively normal. Until he went to speak for himself and I saw his father grip his arm so tightly that it left a mark. I understood immediately that his parents basically didn't let him speak at all for fear of reprisal. A few weeks afterward, the kid stopped showing up to school. And word eventually got around that he got caught up in a meth lab explosion in his parents' house and was covered head to toe in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He came back a month or so later, covered in bandages. He couldn't move, write, or really do anything without excruciating pain. I'd never cried so hard as I did that day. Sorry, I know it got off track, but there are certain stories that stick with you. My wife called a student's parents to talk about the kid swearing all the time and general bad attitude. After explaining to the mom why she was calling, I told that goddamn kid a million fucking times to watch his fucking mouth. Jesus Christ, wait till his fucking daddy gets home. I was that kid. Father worked shifts, and when he was home he was doing backyard car repairs to help make ends meet. Not because he didn't earn a good living, he actually did. But because my mother was a gambling addict. Instead of addressing the problem, he focused on solving the symptoms. I went to school from an unheated house with a mother still in bed and no breakfast in freezing weather with no coat because she spent the money on gambling. Went for years without medical treatments for the same reason. No toothpaste, no hair conditioner, no haircuts, old shoes, socks and underwear with holes. All because anything she could make us do without went to gambling. Pee was done in the frigid school gym in bare feet and a t-shirt because gym shoes and sweatshirts cost money that could be used to make bets instead. One day the vice principal called me to her office. Not to reprimand me but to give me the optional pieces of uniform I didn't have, like a coat and a school blazer. They were the options without which you froze half to death as you walked or biked several miles to school. She didn't make a big deal out of it, she simply met a need. Her act of kindness lit a spark in me. To this day, almost 40 years later, I still put money, time and hard work into caring for others and charity work. I'm the mom who will volunteer at school, quietly contribute anything the teachers are short of that person. Not for recognition or thanks, in fact I am embarrassed if you do that. It's because nearly 40 years ago someone cared. This one broke my heart and it's something I still think about from time to time. Just a few months into my first year, several 5th grade students were sent home for lice. One was a small, blonde girl named Jane who was fairly quiet and shy. Her clothes were always somewhat unkempt and had a strong cigarette smoke odor. She very rarely completed her homework and hated answering questions in class. However, she was kind, attentive, and performed well on her in-class assignments. We had another round of head checking about a week after the first one and found that Jane still had lice, caught lice again. She was sent home with a call to the parents letting them know. The next day she walked into the classroom with a shaved head. Her parents shaved her hair off so that they did not have to deal with the lice again. She cried when I asked her about it. I felt horrible for her. 5th grade is a tough place to be when you have something that is obviously different about you that other kids can pick on. I could not grow her hair back for her, but I did buy her a cute hat that I allowed her wear in my class if she wanted. It seemed to help. When I met her parents shortly after, they showed up with 3 younger kids that looked about a year apart with the same shaved haircut as Jane. The parents smelled like cigarette smoke and pet urine odor, and I could hear them cursing at their kids in the hallway before I even saw them. A girl in my 7th grade class was really bright, but almost never turned in her homework, so she just skated by on test scores. One time, I commended her for helping another student who didn't understand the assignment, only to realize that night that she didn't do her own. I called her parents in and quickly realized they're the type that have an answer for everything. And were all too quick to put the responsibility on me. As if I should stand over their daughter to make sure she works. I turned to ask the girl what she thought, since she had been completely quiet, and her parents began to answer for her again. I put my index up and said, "No, you've had your turn. I want to hear what she thinks about all this." Well, she apparently really appreciated that, because she went on for about 30 minutes about all her views on education. At the end, I kept her parents quiet and told her that if she's willing to talk such a big game, she needs to back it up and do the work without her parents or me interfering. She didn't miss another assignment all year. Proud teacher moment. I noticed quite a few negative stories here. Well, here is a positive one where it clicked. I have a student who is really friendly, really smart, and amazing at English. I am an ESL teacher abroad. She is always really friendly to me and always really hardworking. She constantly helps other kids in class who struggle with the material and overall just a great girl. I met her dad once at a school event and holy goodness was this guy awesome. He was a really genuine and generous character and even invited me to get to know different parts of the city with his family. I could definitely tell they had a close bond and that he had raised her really well. Just an example of good people raising other good people. Edit a word. Kindergarten teacher here. Had a student who would much rather sing everything than talk. And she was happiest just spinning around in circles and singing. Met her parents' band teacher and a dance instructor. Such a sweet and happy family. 9th grader thought she was entitled to an A despite her work not being A quality work, let alone B quality. Met her mom a few weeks into the school year, who happens to be on our board of directors. She also has a habit of treating teachers as if they're lesser taunts, and is essentially enabled by our school founder. On top of that, her son, a senior at the time, didn't earn college acceptance. However, our principal lied at graduation and said he'd gotten into a university he hadn't actually been admitted to. Why? Because our school is touted as a college preparatory. Can't possibly mar our good name. My best friend is a teacher. He told about this one kid's parents he met. The kid was insanely smart, 12, genius level. He would finish his work and just play on his phone or talk to friends. But he had 0 homework turn-in rate. My friend requested to meet his parents. Ended up finding out that his father would beat him repeatedly. And the kid would never truly go home, but rather take up working instead of being home with his father. It was sad because the kid admitted that he was capable of doing his homework, but he was too scared to, and just didn't have the will to face his dad. Apparently later the kid came back to meet a couple teacher including my friend. He rolled up in a BMW i8, I guess he made it out somewhere. This is from back when I was doing my student teaching. There was a girl in one of my classes that never did any work in class. Turned in her homework late. And would ignore huge projects until literally the last minute, and then asked to come in for help every day at lunch after school to make up for the missing work. Eventually I caught her cheating on a quiz. She had written down the answers, put them in the plastic cover of her binder, and put her binder down by her feet. I took her quiz, gave her a 0, and told her that cheating wasn't allowed. About a week later, we had parent-teacher conferences. The girl came with her mother, who took out every assignment that had been graded and handed back, and proceeded to argue with me over individual points. Things along the lines of, well, she spelled it all right. So that deserves some credit. Right? Or she circled the right answer. So she should still get some credit. When that right answer had been crossed off and then another answer had been selected. This took nearly an hour to go through. Finally, the mother brought up the quiz, and I told her about the cheating. The mom said, well, you should give her some credit on it, she was pretty clever to think of that trick. From then on, I made sure to schedule meetings with myself, my mentor teacher, and the principal present. I was telling the parent that their child was generally inattentive. He would look around, fidget, and just nod along smiling when I knew it hadn't been listening. As I was consulting my notes, I looked up to see the parent looking around the room, bouncing their leg. As soon as they realized that I was done talking, they nodded and smiled. Edit: this child did not have ADHD or autism, he just had a short attention span. I was teaching in a private school in the Middle East, and although most students should have been ESL, they were taught English at a higher level. I figure he just didn't care that much. Not a teacher but a student. In kindergarten we had this kid who was really odd and smelled funny, but he seemed cool, so we would hang out at recess. I had a birthday party and it was only supposed to last maybe a few hours. All of the kids but him went home fairly early, but it was really late and his parents still hadn't showed up. I was getting tired and wanted to go to bed, so my parents set up some blankets for us in the living room and we had a sleepover. At 2 a.m. his parents finally show up, after multiple calls with no answer. Instantly I realized what was up. Even as a small child I knew these parents were the definition of white trash. They reeked of alcohol. My mom's side of the family is full of alcoholics, so I knew what it smelled like. They also told some bullshit story about how they had new tires of their car and the speedometer showed the wrong speed and they got pulled over, and some other bullshit. It all clicked why he acted so odd and why he smelled. It was cigarette smoke. At the start of first grade he never showed up, and like a month into the year he was there for a few days. Then randomly in third grade he showed back up again for a few weeks. I never saw him again after that. I looked him up on Facebook a while back and it looks like he is following in his parents' footsteps, up falling into every white trash stereotype. I asked my parents about this kid a while ago and they said that the reason he wasn't with us in school for a few years is that he got taken away by Child Protective Services, which my mom called. Then he came back the W times because that's when his parents got him back, but he was taken away again and that's why he left us. I feel bad for the kid because at first he was really nice, but over time as I saw him again he became more mean and rude. Such shitty parents.